Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 3 p.m. ET, and we are so thrilled that you have found us here on a very special edition of Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. You know, Crime Time is usually on at 4 p.m., off and on at 4 p.m., but we could not wait to bring you Deborah Goodrich Royce and her new book, Reef Road. So we gave her a special time so we could make sure that you got to meet her and hear all about this fabulous book. And we will talk to Deborah in 1 second. I am your host today, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 novels of suspense. My brand new book, The House Guest, is just out and went into a second printing after 6 days. So this is you all. Thank you so much. I am so pleased about that. Diane Dick is here and says hello. Susie Baldwin is here. Sherry Steuben is here, says hi. Hank and Deborah says Susie Baldwin all the way from Seattle. Hello. So nice to see you all today. And I know people will be coming. Anissa is here, who I know Deborah and I have both met on book tour.
Hi, Anissa.
The queen of us all. So welcome, welcome, welcome to all of you here today. As I said, Deborah Royce is the author of the fabulous novel Reef Road. So much to talk about this book, you all. It is atmospheric, it is chilling, it is heartbreaking, it is captivating. Deborah is such a storyteller. I will tell you that Luann Rice, no less than, says it is magnificent and has left me shaken to the core. And she is talking about Reef Road. So, hey, Brenda Gaskell is here and Darlene McElhaney is here saying, yes, excited for this interview. This novel is on lots of recommendation lists, including mine. It is marvelous. You'll see my little name on the back. I love that. Thank you. Anyway, Deborah is home, and I cannot believe you're actually at your house because you have been on the most epic book tour I've ever seen in my entire life.
It has been incredible. Thank you, Hank, for having me. I flew this morning and I thought if for any reason my flight is canceled, I'll just talk to Hank wherever I am. But I'm very glad to be home. I'm a little disoriented, like what is where. And there's this horrifying pile of Christmas gifts that were open but never put away, much to my shame, because I took off at the beginning of January. So I have some things to do.
That's hilarious. I can just imagine a pile of Christmas gifts. Have you opened them at least?
Yes, they're open. Okay. There's a cute cup of grandkids, you know, things are open, but everything has to be sort of incorporated. I think there was a moment where we just pushed it aside and took off.
Well, first things first, and the book comes first. We're talking to you all about Reef Road. If you just joined us, like Shannon Hansen has just joined us, and Renee Herskowitz says, where did you fly home from this morning? Love to know that.
I was in Florida. I was in Palm Beach, where Reef Road is set. So that was kind of cool. I spoke yesterday to a group of bank clients. And Hank, you know, those kinds of events are really fun because banks sometimes for their clients will put together a luncheon, and we had a lot of fun.
And I want to talk to you later in the interview about what people ask you about this book, because one of the fun things about book tour is finding out how readers think. And I want you all in the comments to leave your questions for Deborah as well, because part of the reason we do Crime Time is to hear what you have to say, to have you ask some questions of our marvelous authors. Let me quickly tell you, if you're not familiar with A Mighty Blaze and Crime Time, A Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 3 years ago now, yikes, by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us all connected in book world and to keep us knowing about new novels and meeting our favorite authors and maybe even making some new favorite authors. And one of our hundreds of guests is the fabulous Deborah Goodrich Royce, who is here today to talk about Reef Road. I promise you I'll stop talking in a minute, but I want to tell you very briefly Deborah Royce's official bio. Deborah Goodrich Royce's thrillers examine puzzles of identity, and that's so interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Reef Road, want to see this gorgeous cover one more time? Well, not one more time, but look at that. I agree, Shannon Hansen, the birds of paradise on the cover, on that stark black, that is absolutely irresistible. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, Reef Road hit the Publisher's Weekly bestseller list. That's a big deal. Good Morning America's top 15 list, a big deal, and was an Indie Next pick by the American Booksellers Association for January 2023. Massive deal. Such a success this book is. Deborah began as an actress on All My Children, and I want you to tell us if you have seen her on All My Children, and in multiple films before transitioning to the role of story editor at Miramax Films, developing Emma and early versions of Chicago and A Wrinkle in Time. I'm trying to act cool, but it's not working. With her husband, Chuck, Deborah restored the Avon Theater, Ocean House Hotel, Deer Mountain Inn, United Theater, Savoy Bookstore, and numerous Main Street revitalization projects in Rhode Island and the Catskills. She holds a bachelor's degree in modern foreign languages and an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Lake Erie College. And in her spare time, you all, she writes these amazing books like the brand new Reef Road, which is just out from Post Hill and is being lauded across the country. Tell us a little bit about this book, Deborah. I'm always afraid to describe books because I love to hear what the authors have to say.
Well, Reef Road is based on a true crime. My mother's best friend was brutally murdered on December the 10th, 1948. And as with many people, this is a common syndrome, people who exist kind of metaphorically next door to extreme acts of violence. Those acts don't exist in a vacuum. They really have an effect on other people. So I've always known that my mother was very traumatized by this real murder. And, you know, it was always in my consciousness. And when the pandemic, which, you know, is the genesis of so many things, positive and negative, when the pandemic shut us down in March of 2020, I was in Florida, and I thought, I'm going to finally research that real crime. And lo and behold, there was a treasure trove of material available on the internet. I don't know who the gremlins are who go back and upload all these archival newspaper stories, but somebody had uploaded all of this coverage, really spanning from 1948 till about 1953. In Pittsburgh.
Oh.
And as I was researching it, I was also able to get the coroner's report from the University of Pittsburgh. I spoke to the Pittsburgh Police Department. They didn't want to talk about it. It's essentially still an open case, or it's a cold case, but it was never solved. I made the decision to fictionalize it. I wanted to explore what I would call a greater truth, this idea of generational trauma or conferred trauma, trauma that maybe isn't exactly ours, but yet it is ours in another way. And I didn't want to get mired in the details of the real case.
Well, so let's go back a little bit, because I want to sort of unpack this from the beginning. So when you found this treasure trove of research, and I have to think that the universe was saying, Deborah, this is time for you to do this now, and here it all is. How did what you knew from your mother, or sort of assumed from your mother, or absorbed from your mother, compare to what really happened?
That is a brilliant question. And I'm not surprised knowing you, Hank, because you have that kind of mind. So my mother's takeaway, and my mom is still alive and well, her takeaway really over the decades when I heard about this was that kind of fixed view of the 12-year-old she was at the time. And her takeaway comes under the category of what we would now call stranger danger. My mother had it in her mind that this terrible force entered the home of her friend and obviously killed her. In doing the real research, most suspicion really has always fallen on one brother. The real girl had two brothers, a 19-year-old brother and a 24-year-old brother. The suspicion has always fallen on the 19-year-old brother. And then there was this whole kind of wacky thing going on in several years after the real crime, where all these citizen detectives were running around Pittsburgh, arresting him, which makes its way into the book in a fictionalized way. including a woman who was referred to as a pistol packing sweater girl. And I love that term. And when I talk to younger audiences, I say, that means she looked nice in a sweater, in case they can't unpack that. So I think it was a very different situation from what my mother had perceived. I don't think my grandmother let my mother read the newspaper articles of the time. She was only 12. And things then didn't go viral the way they do now.
But then you get hand-me-down memories. You get memories from your grandmother to your mother filtered in to you. And your mother is creating a story in her head as well. And then, you know, then little girl you, when was the first time you heard about it?
Great question. I feel like I've always known about it, but I can't imagine my mother told me when I was little. Let's say I was an adolescent. Let's say it came into the category of some kind of warning to be careful, a really unsettling thing. And it reminds me of when you're younger and you read a word and you only ever see a word written and you have it in your little brain as being pronounced a certain way. And then suddenly you hear someone say it and you're like, wait a second, that's not the way I've learned that word. My mother had always said her friend was stabbed 37 times. Point of fact, she was stabbed 36. Every newspaper article said 36. And a coroner's report, and I'm sure you've read them, they break it down where each of the stab wounds were. So I'm sitting there with my calculator, adding them up, and it really was 36. I mean, what's the difference between 37 and 36? Other than it's one of those jarring, I need to recalibrate this whole thing in my brain moments.
Those moments are so strange because everything you think you know, that's a fact. When that starts fraying, then you start wondering what else is wrong, what else is different, what else am I looking for? Not unlike the character in your book. And I have to tell you, just really parenthetically, I always thought the word misled was misled. He was misled by that. So I know.
That's what I mean. Or when they intentionally misspell a word, the automobile, INFINITI. When I first saw it, I'm like, infiniti. What is that?
I know my little brother thought it was that kind of a car was a Plymouth, not
Plymouth. That's what I mean.
That's fun. Anyway, digression. You know, we're friends. You know,
I love a digression.
I do too. So this book, though, begins. Well, and then don't let me forget you all to go back to talk about this real life crime and how it bloomed into a fictional story in your head. Let me just do that right now, because one of the problems is, or situations is, or glories is, that when you know something, when you know as much of the truth as you can know about a thing, which is obviously not everything, and then you're making it into fiction, how did you run into a thing that you needed to change and then have to remind yourself, this is just fiction, this is not the real story? How did the fact affect the fiction?
Very much so. And that's a very good point. And I love talking about this thing that Alice McDermott, the novelist, in distinguishing nonfiction from fiction, she talks about the idea that in nonfiction, the writer is actually obliged to include every single fact, whereas in the writing of fiction, the possibilities are infinite, that whatever you can think of, you can put into the book. So the task is different. The task is to limit. That's what you're doing in fiction. So I love that distinction. So for example, in the real story, the real murdered girl had two brothers, the 19-year-old brother, the suspect, and the 24-year-old brother who was married and lived outside of the house. Early draft, one of my friends, who's one of my beta readers, read what I had, and she said, what's with the second brother? I'm confused. And I thought, aha, I don't need him. He serves no purpose to this story other than to confuse people. So that's a great example.
Yes, that is a great example, and exactly what I was talking about, that you have to open your mind to fiction. talking about open your mind, you all were talking about Reef Road, and I see so many more people coming here today. When I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments. Begins with this unbelievably chilling scene. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that gets you into the story? And then we'll talk about the rest of the book.
Yeah, so I'm a lover of a good prologue. I love a tease in a movie. I love a tease in a book. If you think about the opening of Citizen Kane, where he is an old man, and I think he has the snow globe, and he drops it, and it rolls across the floor, and he whispers the word rosebud. You know it's significant. You don't know how, why, but you've got your cue cards. So the prologue of Reef Road begins on Reef Road Beach. This is a famous surfing beach in Palm Beach, Florida. There's a street called Reef Road and a beach at the end of it. And it begins at, high noon, brilliant sunshine, when two teenage surfer boys cross a do not enter tape to get onto the beach. So you're being handed information. For some reason, they can't go on the beach. You don't know why yet. They see seagulls gathering around something, fighting over something. They pause to see what it is, and it is a severed human hand. And this, of course, ends their outing for the day. But I got to research my surfer speak. I have a son-in-law and his brother who are surfers. And so I got to write the lines, which tickled me enormously, where one surfer brother says to the other surfer brother about this hand, he says, "Dude, do you think it's real?" And the other brother takes a pause and says, "The seagulls do."
That's great. I mean, it is such a moment because it's funny on the outside and terrifyingly sinister on the inside. I mean, the way that human beings paper over terrible things by trying to make up a reason why it may not be as bad as it clearly is. One of the main characters in this story is an author in search of a story. Talk a little bit about her and about that, and how, and Renee says awesome lines. Exactly, dude. And talk a little bit about how your search for the story and the reporter and the character in the novel's search for a story are parallel and intertwined.
Mm-hmm. So first I have to tell you, because my mom is still alive and well, that as I fictionalized the writer obsessed with the murder of her mother's best friend, I made them a lot less stable than my mother and I actually are. So if you ever meet my mom, please tell her I told you that. So I decided to write the point of view of the writer, which are separate sections in this novel, in first person. You are in her very obsessive brain. She is fixated on this murder. She is quite intrigued by arcane murder statistics in general. And when you write a character like that, I think it's fun to really indulge that side of your own personality. So naturally, I have an obsessive side. I try to keep it a little bit more reeled in, but I got to indulge that. And boy, did I find some wacky murders, including this murder in Palm Beach that revolved around this house, which is nicknamed the Ham and Cheese House. And it was a murder that was actually profiled on a show Dominic Dunn had 20 odd years ago on television about weird murders.
So you had to come, I mean, this is about an unsolved murder, this writer trying to solve or look into a cold case, an unsolved murder. And you had to create a murder based on your research plus reality. What was it like to do that? And you know that you're writing a mystery, you know you're writing a page-turning thriller. Can't say that without saying Reef Road by Deborah Goodrich Royce. Pamela Fry-Priest, that's a great question. We'll ask it in a little while.
Yeah, I will answer the question about the Ham and Cheese House. Do you want me to do that later or now? I'm gonna.
No, it's fine.
Ham and Cheese House. It was alternating red brick, white coral keystone. So it was strips of, you know, red and white and red and white. It's still there. Look it up.
That's hilarious.
So what was your question, Hank?
About you had to make a murder. You had to create a murder for her to try to solve. Talk a little bit about what that murder, what that murder turned out to be.
I stuck fairly close to the facts of the real murder. I kept the date. I kept many of the circumstances. I kept some of the details of these swirling people in this kind of chaos. I read a big tome about the John Benet Ramsey murder. I think in modern times, it's a comparable kind of crime, although it went viral as things do now. I think it was comparable in that it was a very bungled investigation. Thank you for that word. And everything just went wrong. People touched things they shouldn't have touched. People were allowed in a house that shouldn't have been there. And there were similar types of feelings around the real murder, the real murder, as I said, is unsolved. And I think it reached a point that it never would have been solvable. So.
But in a book has to have an ending, and we won't go any farther than that. You were talking earlier, Brenda says, I've heard of gingerbread houses, but not a ham and cheese house. It's the whole smorgasbord of houses. There's just no question about that. A novel is letting us into people's lives. That's what you do as an author, is you open the door to people's lives. What did you want us to know about the mother and the daughter and the people in your book?
So Reef Road, on the one hand, is a plot-driven thriller, particularly the other storyline. There's a storyline of a younger woman, a wife, whose husband and children go missing early on in the pandemic lockdown, and her husband's from Argentina, and the police find the car at Miami International Airport and security camera footage of the husband and children getting on a plane bound for Buenos Aires, and the wife can't follow because of the COVID lockdown and border closures. So that's plot. But at a thematic level, I really did want to think about generational trauma. I think everyone, as you come to find out, each of these characters has something going on in their family's past that really leads you to how they find themselves in this cocktail of things going on in 2020 in this hothouse COVID lockdown atmosphere in Florida. The wife, her storyline was very influenced by film noir. And if you know anything about noir, which I know you do, Hank, in noir, you really always better pay close attention to a woman and what she's up to. So pay attention to the wife, pay attention to everything that's going on there. And I ended up in those early days rewatching terrific film noir called Body Heat.
Oh, sure.
It's set in Florida. It's filmed in Lantana, Florida, right down the road from where I set this. And if you watch Body Heat again, with Kathleen Turner and William Hurt, it's such a good film noir. And it's palpable that you're in Florida. Everybody's hot, everybody's sweaty, and everybody's bad. They're just bad. So I wanted some of that tone to permeate the book.
And that really comes through. I always think of Kathleen Turner's silk shirt, silk blouse that was always clinging to her. And, you know, for better or for worse, talk about a pistol packing sweater girl with sweater.
Exactly.
Well, but still, two more things, a couple more things, a million more things. You were talking about COVID and the hothouse of COVID and the hothouse of crime and the hothouse of people being thrown together, not to mention that it gave you the opportunity and the open door to write this novel. How did COVID affect how you wrote this?
Well, if you go back to what Alice McDermott said about, put some constraints, you have to put a box around what you're writing. COVID was many things, and I know people have different experiences, but in terms of a literary setting, it adds a very nifty box around a thriller. And if you think about, let's say you pick up a thriller that's set in 1944 Paris, you know certain things instantly about what your characters can and cannot do. There is a box
and what they're afraid of
because of the war. Exactly. So with COVID, this book is not about COVID. I'm not asking you to sit and read a treatise on the coronavirus pandemic, but you know instantly what's boxing your characters in. So I think it was very useful.
What was that cathartic to write? Did it make you feel powerful, and that I mean, you couldn't go places, but you could emotionally go places. You could go places in your imagination and be in someone else's mind in this scary time.
Very much so. And being in Florida, because of the climate and it was so warm, I could go outside. I could ride my bicycle up and down the island of Palm Beach, which really was weird. It felt like the Twilight Zone, because it was like the whole town had been, what's that word, raptured. Everybody had disappeared. So there was nobody out. And they did have those yellow do not enter tapes blocking the beaches. So nobody was allowed to go anywhere other than you could kind of ride your bike up and down the road. And it really, it was, I said, a hothouse feeling. It felt like it lent itself perfectly.
Yeah. And it worked so beautifully in the story. It was just such a, and it is still in a way, such a disconnected time. I remember driving through downtown Boston, where I live, bustling downtown Boston, and there was no one. It was apocalyptic. It was empty streets and boarded up buildings. And I thought, this is absolutely transporting and terrifying. So to infuse that in a book, we're talking about Reef Road, you all, by the fabulous Deborah Goodrich Royce, which is just out now with this beautiful, glossy, irresistible, jeweled, like Birds of Paradise cover. This is such a perfect book club book. I know you've been to book clubs. What do people say to you, and what do they ask you in their book clubs? What do you wish they would ask you?
Well, people often ask, and this probably happens to you. So I have two female protagonists. So they say, which one is you? And I always think all the characters are me. I'm putting a piece of myself into every single character. Having been an actress, that's really what you're called to do. I mean, years ago, I played the woman who married Ted Bundy opposite Mark Harmon in the 1986 miniseries about Ted Bundy. So how do you play a character like that? I mean, you find the thing, the point. So with her, I decided she simply did not believe he did it. That was my position. I thought, how could she marry him and think he did it? So that's a question I always think is interesting. People do like to talk about generational trauma. I talk about a book I've read recently, a nonfiction book called It Didn't Start With You, on the subject of epigenetics. And epigenetics is a scientific way of looking at handed down trauma genetically. Is there some genetic level at which we carry trauma? There might be implications with depression, anxiety, addiction. So what is it that we carry that really isn't ours? And what can we do about that? That's a big theme that we talk about.
And how do readers react to what your characters do in this book? How, for instance, the writer pursues the story? What happens with the family? Although, what do they say about their mothers and what happened in their lives?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the writer is a troubled woman, and she obsesses over Linda, this younger wife, and it's a very complicated friendship. So people have a lot to ask about why the writer does this or that or the other thing. The same with Linda. Linda, the writer is probably more manipulative, whereas Linda is probably more a creature of her desires. She's led around by desire. They each have a redeeming feature, though. The writer really loves her dog, and she's a very good dog mom. And Linda really loves her children, and she's a really good mom. And I think those are their shining glories, each of those women.
Do readers tell you about their relationships with their mothers and what happened to them as little girls?
Well, they talk more about things that happened in their families, things that they've carried. You know, if you think about epigenetics, some of the big sweeping cultural events that come under this field of study would be the Holocaust, people who are descended of Holocaust victims, the genocide of the Native Americans, people who are descended of that, the descendants of enslaved Americans. You know, what is it that we carry? So people do talk about that, and I always see them nodding when I introduce this topic. They're thinking about things that have happened in their families.
You wonder whether you know it or you are it.
That's the question. And epigenetics would argue that it's something that's kind of cellular. In Reef Road, the writer knows what happened to her mother's best friend. So there's a consciousness about it. She's heard about it. She knows about it. If you take it over to that other study, epigenetics, it can be things you don't even know about. It's fascinating.
Really, really fascinating. Before we go to the questions from the audience, and I know we have some, so I know that the fabulous Trisha backstage will be looking for those right now. Let's talk about the setting, though. You were saying Florida and sweltering and body heat and the beach, but Reef Road is a real place, a real road, and a real place. And it's such a gorgeous title. You want to see the cover one more time, because you can win. Did I tell you this? I didn't tell you this. You have to remind me. You can win a copy of Reef Road by Deborah Goodrich Royce. You could win a copy by leaving a question or a comment in the, what's that word? Chat, in the chat. And the Backstage Gremlins will pick a winner in about 5 minutes. So leave a question or a comment. The more questions and comments you leave, the better chance you have, right, you all? Deborah, a question or a comment, or even just general applause and adulation for Deborah Goodrich Royce. Thank you, Renee, for saying an excellent discussion. So talk a little bit about Florida. Talk a little bit about Reef Road. Do people go there and see it?
It's such a delicious setting. So there's a quotation that I've heard some people attribute to Carl Hyacin as having said about Florida. And then I heard a correction where someone said, no, it was Somerset Maugham, and he said it about the French Riviera in the 1920s. But the quotation is the following: a sunny place for shady people. And that is what I wanted to capture. I think there's something about very glitzy, glamorous places that sparkle on the surface, where we, the reader, want to see what is that seedy underbelly, what is going on underneath. So I knew I wanted the writer to live on this street called Oleander Avenue, which is not a typical Palm Beach street. It's kind of, you know, those 1960s apartment buildings that you see in LA that have the hallways on the outside, like a motel.
Yes.
So there are a lot of those on Oleander Avenue, and it's kind of behind the Publix grocery store. That's where I wanted the writer to live, because she is, she's sort of in Palm Beach, but she's not really of Palm Beach. But then on the north end of Palm Beach.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. I could be wrong, but isn't oleander poison? Isn't it poison?
Well, there's that too. Yes. There's meaning in everything. All these things are little winks. Indeed, that's true.
So go on. So you said the north side.
As I'm riding my bike around, on the southern end of Palm Beach is the estate section. Those are the vast mansions of the seasonal wealthy visitors. That's where the ham and cheese house is. But on the north end, it's more residential. Think about, it looks more like Santa Monica before it became super, you know, built up, or Venice Beach. There were a lot of 3-bedroom ranch houses, surfboards dropped everywhere, Jeeps, bicycles. So as I'm riding my bike around, I'm thinking, I need a street for Linda Alonso. I don't know yet it's going to be the title of the book. And there's such pretty street names in places like Florida, like Dolphin and Hibiscus and, you know, Banyan. And then I hit Reef Road. And it reminds me of titles like Cape Fear. That's a real place name, but it evokes something perilous. So Reef Road, you know, coral reefs are dangerous. You can run aground. And I thought, that's where she's going to live. And it became the title of the book.
And look how nice it looks on the cover. It's so strong and so sinister on this gorgeous black cover. Randy Trent was just saying, I cannot wait to read this book. And we all are eager to read it. Now, I will ask you, because I know all of you in the comments are too polite to ask Deborah, but please tell us about your soap opera days. We just can't wait to hear.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, I played the sister of Erica Kane, who was played by Susan Lucci, who was the star of all stars on All My Children for 40 years. She really was it. She was that show. And I played her kind of troubled, diabolical sister, Silver Kane. And my storyline was taken from the movie All About Eve. If you remember that movie with Bette Davis and Ann Baxter, there's a younger woman who attaches herself like a barnacle to a big star, the Bette Davis character, and tries to really usurp her life, her position, her husband. That was the Silver character to the Erica character. And it was a very interesting thing. It was my first big job as an actress. And on a soap opera, you're playing that character every single day. And I was such a nut job. It got under my skin a little bit. I was kind of glad when that one was over.
But what an experience. And how many people say to you when you're on these massive book tours, and I know you can go to your website, DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com, and find your events and follow Deborah on Facebook and Instagram. And Twitter, are you on Twitter?
Oh, yeah, I'm on Twitter. Instagram's my sweet spot.
And you have your Friday books?
Friday reads. I've done one of your books. And yeah, I do not every Friday, but often on Fridays, I talk about books I like, which has become a wonderful dialogue with other people on Instagram.
So be sure to follow Deborah on Instagram. But going back to the soap opera days, I mean, you wouldn't trade it though, would you? Even though, how many people have said to you at every event you go to, I saw you on TV.
Right. I wouldn't trade it. I think writing is really more my thing. Silver is still in jail. That's exactly right. I said to my darling husband once, who has no filter, I said, Chuck, I think I really am a much better writer than I ever was an actress. He said, absolutely. You could hold back a little. I mean, sugarcoat it. Yeah, just for the guys. That was a wonderful movie. And another movie was April Fool's Day, which was a very complicated, twisty. It was horror that was very tongue-in-cheek with a twist. It was really a precursor to Scream.
Oh, we should talk about this because I have connections to Scream. But let me just ask you now as a final question before we get to the well, Renee says, what time are your Friday reads? So she can find them.
So it's just on Friday, and it's just up, or it's on my website. I have a reflection section of my website where you can find them all, where I just talk for a couple minutes about a book I love. I never talk about a book I don't love. Nobody wants to know that from me, not my job. So it's fun. It's a way of sharing.
I was on the board of the Lyric Stage Theater Company, a professional theater company in Boston. And our producing artistic director used to come on stage before the show and say, if you like our production, tell all your friends. If you don't like it, don't say anything. So that's what we do. That's what we do. Deborah, you have been such a success with this book and your earlier book. How does it, this wonderful new second half of your life and career has just bloomed. What do you think about that?
I am in a state of profound gratitude. So I've been on this very heavy tour, and my mom will say to me, "Oh, you must be exhausted." And I think I'm really not exhausted because I am approaching it with this kind of attitude of gratitude. When I was a young actress and all of these big things happened, they were terrific, and I did appreciate them. But I probably had a little bit of a feeling like, oh, this is just going to go on forever. This is just beginning. And life took different turns, which have all been wonderful. Now, I feel like it's not a chore to go and do something like this right now to talk about my book. It's an opportunity. And that, I think, is age and maturity. I just feel so lucky to, first of all, I mean, I've only written 3 books so far. I'm halfway through a 4th. I feel so lucky to have had a string of ideas because on the one hand, sure, we work hard, hard, hard. On the other hand, there is a little bit of pixie dust that's like allowing these ideas to download. You know that. I mean, look at you, 14 books. And you're a wonderful writer. And I know you work your tail off, but on the other hand, there is something that you're tapping into, right? It's it's crazy.
Magic.
Yeah.
It's magic. There's no question about it. You're open to it, and I'm open to it, and you all in the comments are open to it. You just have to know that things happen when the time comes. And wow, Deborah Royce, they certainly have happened and are happening to you. Let's take some questions from the audience. I know we have many of them. B.A. Nichols, hey, nice to see you, says, how many drafts did you write before it was ready?
Oh, I write a lot of drafts, and sometimes I can't even define what a whole draft is because I edit as I go along. Generally speaking, I'm slower. It takes me about a year to have a draft. And with Reef Road, it's an unusual book because the writer's sections, I love this new word, they're very meta. They're very self-referential. The writer is talking about writing, and she's talking about it with you, the reader. And I'm not saying my book is at the level of, but a book that I can think of that's meta this way is The French Lieutenant's Woman by John Fowles. That book is very self-referential, and you have things going on, and you're kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit. So it took me about a year to have a draft. And then it took me 3, 4, 5 months to really make sure I had it packed together the way I wanted to have it packed together. And then some more revisions. So I'm going to say two years. And I wish I could give you how many drafts that is. I just don't even know.
They're just iterations of changing and fixing and tweaking and pulling threads and snipping things out and weaving the tapestry of the book. Sure. We have time for 2 more questions, I think, quickly. Let's see any other questions. Were you able to write much during your extensive tour?
No, I have not written, and I've had people I work with say, so how's the next book coming? I wrote about 100 pages of it sort of last summer into fall. I have lots of notes. I have an idea I love, but there's a reason that I'm a later in life published author. It sounds like I do a lot all at once. I think I'm more of a sequential person. So for me, writing is a very deep dive. So it's coming. I'm going back to that this summer.
Well, we're not pushing you at all. We can't wait to have your next book, but let's just revel in the joy of Reef Road. And I won't push you. I know someone had a question about what are you working on next, but we're working on allowing you to show off Reef Road to all of your fans, new fans, and your devoted fans. Let's take one last question, and then we'll draw for the winner. One last question. Anissa, hey, sweetheart, what is the best, worst advice that you've received from another author?
When I was about 70 pages into my first book, Finding Mrs. Ford, I was sitting with a lovely author friend, Harriet Cole. She writes wonderful nonfiction books on African-American cultural rituals. She wrote a wonderful book about marriage rituals in the Black American world called Jumping the Broom. Anyway, I'm sitting with Harriet, and she said, how many days a week are you writing, Deborah? And I said, oh, Harriet, I'm writing 1 day a week. And she looked at me and she said, you are never going to finish your book if you write 1 day a week. Best advice I ever got. I changed my life, reorganized everything, stepped back from boards, stopped a lot of other stuff. So that was the best advice. Worst advice, I would say, is that, you have to do anything in a particular way. Like a lot of writers write first thing in the morning. Fabulous. I was able to do that in COVID. When life got busier or was busier before, I can't always write first thing in the morning. Find your own pattern. I block out 3 to 6 hour windows every day, but they're not always at the same time. So that's my way.
we do whatever works, and it works gorgeously. Deborah Goodrich Royce and Reef Road. Let's pick a winner of this marvelous book. And if you are the winner, there's, oh, look at that so quickly, Renee, who has asked so many wonderful questions. Such a devoted fan of Crime Time, Renee. You are wonderful. So please email me with your info, and we will get you a copy of Reef Road. Before I let you go, Deborah, don't you all move. All of you, when I look over here, I'm looking in the comments. Don't you all move, because coming up at 4 o'clock in just however many minutes that is, 12, look who we have, Jacqueline Winspear. Oh my golly, again, I am trying to act cool, but I'm not going to be cool about this. This is her brand new book with a brand new heroine, The White Lady. And I don't want you to miss this. Jacqueline Winspear is absolutely an icon. And you may have read her Maisie Dobbs historical fiction, but this is new. So see us in about, I'm looking at the clock, 15 minutes, right back here on Crime Time. Pamela Fry-Free says, yay, Renee, congratulations. Deborah, you are a rock star. Thank you so much for being here today. You get the last word for the day. What would you like to say to all of these viewers?
Well, my thanks really go out to you and everyone here. And if anybody's in New England, join me. I have a very robust author series at the Ocean House in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. Hank has been there. We are getting you back next year, Hank, with your next book. I cannot wait. And it's so much fun. You're there on the seaside. You get a glass of wine, hors d'oeuvres, an author talk, and a book. You get to leave with a book. So join me for that.
And it is beautiful. And you can find all about that on Deborah Goodrich Royce's website, which is easy to find. So all of you, come back in 15 minutes for Jacqueline Winspear. Run right now and get Reef Road by Deborah Goodrich Royce. I'll see you in 15 minutes. And remember, you all, it is always safe inside a book. And I'll see you next time.